Welcome to Spitz on Sports with Carey and Company. Brought to you by World of Designs Venice. The only local sports talk show in Sarasota and Charlotte counties. Have a question or comment? Dial us up at 941-460-1530. Now let's head on out to Carey and Spitz.
We're going to start it off with our good friend Tony Cutillo. We haven't had him on in a while. You can follow him on the artist formerly known as Twitter, now X, at Rise with Tony. That's R-I-Z-E with Tony. He's the founder of Heat Ratio Sports and Rise and React Media, the host of Blue Coats Beat. You think I'm busy? Host of WENG Daily on Sirius XM Radio and a fantasy football analyst for WENG Daily Supports. And it's that time of year again, isn't it, Tony?
Oh, yes, it is, man. It's the best time of the year.
Getting those drafts together, teams are reporting. The Texans are completely in camp. I don't know if the Bears are completely in camp, but their rookies are already in camp. We're going to have helmets and shoulder pads in 12 days, even though all those guys are going to be FedEx and UPS drivers, except for probably Caleb Williams, who might get a few snaps in the game.
Yeah, listen, I'll tell you what, man, those Bears, you never know. Rookie quarterbacks are hard, but they did a lot on the offensive side with those receivers. They got a great receiver room out there. So the best thing that you can have for a rookie quarterback is get a really good receiver room. And you have guys like Keenan Allen and DJ Moore out there. I mean, they have the opportunity to really set some records out there. We'll see if they can form that cohesion early, though.
CJ Stroud, they only have to look across the field for a rookie quarterback that made as big of an impact as any rookie quarterback maybe in league history in CJ Stroud. And what are your thoughts on CJ? You know, everybody talks about the sophomore slump, and sometimes when somebody takes a big step, they take a little step backwards. Give me your thoughts on CJ Stroud from the fantasy standpoint.
Yeah, listen, he's one of those quarterbacks. You mentioned the sophomore slump. It's really hard because, you have those top five quarterbacks, which we all know who they are, right? Hurts, Allen, Mahomes, Jackson, Burrow. And then right after that comes CJ Stroud. Now, you're going to have guys at the draft that are probably going to reach for CJ Stroud. But knowing what they did in the offseason by bringing in Stephon Diggs, a huge veteran, still having Nico Collins, I mean, that is one heck of an offense out there. Joe Mixon as a running back. So I don't think he's going to have to do as much, which means he's probably going to be more productive because he's not going to have to force things. So he's still going to get 550 to 580 attempts, which is huge. So if he gets that percentage around 66 to 70%, he's going to put up some fantastic numbers.
Yeah, and they were one-dimensional last year. A lot of people don't realize it was throw. They couldn't run the ball to save their lives, especially in that playoff loss to the Ravens. That's something that they tried to shore up in the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you bring a guy, like I said, you bring a guy in like a Joe Mixon, that just shows that they're ready to go for it. Now, listen, I'm not the biggest Joe Mixon guy in the world, but he's still a guy who averaged 4.0 yards per carry, 4.1 yards a carry in 2021 behind a terrible Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. I mean, he had to do everything. But again, you're talking about 29 touchdowns on the ground in the last 3 years. When you can get 29 touchdowns on the ground 3 years, that's more than the Texans have seen. So that's going to take a little onus off of CJ Stroud. And that's also, it's going to open up the offense on the outside because you're going to bring those safeties down in the box to try to stop a really good running back, which is going to leave those over-the-top routes open, which a guy like Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs is going to be able to exploit.
Fantasy drafts are going to be coming up soon, Tony. Next 3-4 weeks. I'm guessing closer towards middle of August as most leagues start drafting. Have you started to do homework? I know it's still a month out or so.
Oh, absolutely. The homework started 2 months ago, because as soon as the draft ends, you really have to look at the teams and you have to figure out how everything's going to come into play. There are a lot of coaching changes, a lot of scheme changes. Free agencies over, but the draft really fills in those little spots. So that's when the homework begins. And then, you start, I tell people this all the time, the biggest opportunity you have as a fantasy football player is to listen to the coaches. Listen to the press conferences. Understand what they're trying to do. You can watch whatever you want, but listen to them and try to take things out of it. What kind of, dominance they're going to run, whether it be run or pass, what kind of plays they're going to do, what kind of players they've brought in and why. And that's when the homework starts. And listen, every Sunday night on Sirius, we have mock drafts all the time. So we have a lot of fun, and it's just going to get even fun.
What time is that show on Sirius on Sunday nights?
So we just moved. So it used to be 7 to 9. The last 2 weeks were 8 to 10, and now we're 9 to 11. So starting this week, 9 o'clock to 11 p.m. On channel 87, Sirius XM.
That's a great channel, and it's great that you're a part of that as well. Talk to me a little bit. We haven't talked in a while. Again, we're talking with Tony Cutillo. Again, you can follow him on the artist formerly known as Twitter, now X, at Rise with Tony. That's RIZE with Tony. Talk to me a little bit about your newest ventures, because I know we talked a lot about a couple of the things that you've done in the past, but you've got some new stuff going on, don't you?
Listen, Rich, you know this. You always have to stay on top, right? You always have to stay on top, and right. If you drop back for a minute, they catch up, right? So I try to stay as busy as possible. There's a lot of cool adventures going on. Obviously, we're going to be doing a lot of fantasy football season long, which I'm going to lead the charge for WENG Daily this year, which I'm really excited about. And I'm really starting to pump up Heat Ratio Sports. We have a lot of people, especially in Philadelphia, who are just hungry, who want an opportunity. who haven't been given an opportunity. So I'm in the process of building a team there to do post-game shows, to do pre-game shows, and also the relationship I've developed with the Delaware Bluecoats, which are the affiliate of the Philadelphia 76ers, by doing a podcast for them called the Bluecoats Beat with the phenomenal Joe Richmond, who is their ambassador of basketball operations, where we get to interview some fantastic players and coaches and talk about the culture of the team as well. So a lot of things going on. You can never sit back and stop. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and a perfect segue, because I was going to ask you. Celtics won the championship this year in basketball and won it rather easily. Sixers barely got into the tournament. Talk to me a little bit about the Sixers. Is this a make or break year for them? Are they going to have to blow this thing up?
2 years, Rich. 2 years. I've been saying this for probably the last 4 years, right? They have 2 years, man. Like, you have 2 years for prime time Joel Embiid left. That's all you have. And then you bring in a guy like Paul George. Now, I will say this, nationally, a lot of people are a lot of hate on Paul George. And I understand, right? When you play out where you did and, you don't come up big in the playoffs and you have a lot of injuries and now you're 34 years old. But people don't realize what he did last year was one of the best years of his career. And he's going to a situation where he's playing with one of the best, if not the best, big man in all of basketball. And this is exactly this. You talk about a perfect fit. This is the perfect fit for the Sixers right now, because they've never had a guy who could play defense on the wing. They've never had a guy with his size who could create his own shot. He is everything what Tobias Harris should have been, plus more. So I think what they've been able to do by adding guys like a Caleb Martin, adding guys like an Eric Gordon coming off the bench, they have a very, very strong, and I'm going to tell you this, I tell people all the time, if you haven't watched the Summer League, just continue to watch the name Ricky Council. You're going to hear Ricky Council a lot. He got into some games last year. He's going to be a very important part off the bench this year. He's setting records in the Summer League right now. This kid is driven, and he gives a new energy for this Sixers team, and I don't think this is the make or break year. I'll be honest with you. I think it's next year, because I do think it's going to be hard to get all these guys together to really gel within 1 year, but I'm really looking towards next year to really be that make or break season.
By the way, I got to give a shout out. I was just at a GM Connect class with my company, and there were several big time Philadelphia fans in there, and so giving them a shout out this morning for global domination. Again, talking with Tony Cutillo, Rise with Tony on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter. Let's move to baseball. The Phillies have been tremendous in the first half. Best record in baseball. They've been rolling. They've had a few injuries. Bryce Harper got dinged up. They've got a couple of others that they're dealing with. How excited is Philadelphia? One of the true baseball towns left in this left in this country, where truly baseball seems to be king in that town. They fill that stadium constantly.
They really do. Listen, one thing's for sure. I will guarantee you this: that the Phillies will never overtake the bleed green nation of the Philadelphia Eagles in this town, but they will always be the closest, next thing to that big dominance. Because when you could sell out, when you have 42,000 in April on a Thursday night, that just shows that the year and the Colts, right? It's crazy, Rich. I've never seen it. Like, I've lived through 93. I lived through 2008. I lived through the constant sellouts 4 straight years. But I've never seen an energy this early in a season for this Philadelphia Phillies team. And there's something special going on. You mentioned injuries and the next guy up attitude. They have such a camaraderie. And I think that's what the national media doesn't see a lot. They just see numbers and stats. They don't see the backside story where these guys legitimately care for each other. These guys have family dinners on Sunday nights. These guys, like, not just Harper and Turner. We're talking about rookies. We're talking about second-year guys. They truly are a family. And when you create that culture, Rich, sky's the limit. So everybody, there's no pressure. Everybody's having fun. And they're a really exciting team to watch.
But it really is there no pressure? Because the last 2 years they've made runs as wild card teams barely getting in. Now the expectation is going to be, the last couple years they were underdogs against the Braves. Now they're going to be expected to beat the Braves.
Oh, absolutely. And it's going to be harder. But I don't think, Bryce Harper said it best. I don't know if you've seen it, but they asked him, had a great interview with him on All-Star Weekend, and they asked him the same question. They said, is this year World Series or bust? And he said, no, because every year is World Series. And that's the mindset that they have. Yeah, I've never seen a team that's been able to get over crushing losses year in and year out, day after day out. And that's a credit to Rob Thompson. You're a sports guy. You've been going back years, right? He has learned from a level-headed Joe Torre. How when you can go behind, in my opinion, a Hall of Fame manager, obviously, a lot of people, they have mixed emotions with Joe Torre, but never see Joe go crazy. Never see Joe Torre panic. That's who Rob Thompson is. And he has the respect of everybody on that team. Those guys will go to battle for Rob, right? So I think that's one of the most important things to look at, sir.
All right, Tony Cutillo with us talking Philly sports. Let's talk about that mean green of Philly. Off to a tremendous start last year, 10-1. Seemed like everything was going in the right direction. And the thing they have to get over is the stain of that terrible loss to Tampa Bay in the wild card round. I mean, that was, as far of a fall from grace in 6 or 7 weeks as I've ever seen from a team. It looks like they almost checked out. What are you hearing now as we start getting ready for this season? Have they been able to flush that, or is this going to be something that might linger for a little bit?
Well, here's the thing. You're not going to know if they've been able to flush that until they get on the field. One of the things they have done is they changed the culture completely from a coaching perspective. And I think that's something that they needed to do last year, and they didn't do it. They made a big mistake. They listened too much to relationships instead of coaching. What I mean by that is, listen, all due respect to Brian Johnson, who is a fantastic person. He has a fantastic IQ, but when you bring in a guy and you name him a coordinator because he's very good friends with your quarterback, and, sometimes that doesn't always work. Right? So when you have a guy like Jalen Hurts, he needs to be pushed. Jalen Hurts needs to be pushed. He wants to be pushed. So when you have a guy that's kind of standoffish and doesn't push him, sometimes it doesn't work. And I think what you see right now, they've got two obviously very respected coaches in Kellen Moore on the offensive side and Vic Fangio on the defensive side. But I will say this. I'll tell everybody out there who doesn't follow Philly like I do, obviously, one of the most important signs, Rich, from the coaching aspect on this team that I think is really going to make the biggest difference is a guy named Clint Hurt. Clint Hurt is the defensive line coach, was a defensive coordinator for the last 2 years and line coach for the last 3 years before that under Pete Carroll for the Seattle Seahawks. And this is a guy, he's only 45 years old. He's not far disconnected from the game as a player standpoint, and he really gets it. And he's challenging these guys. And when you have a guy like a Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter who needs to be your next guys, where you lose Fletcher Cox, you really need that force, and I think he's one of the most dominant hires that people don't talk about. So I think this year's going to be different, Rich. I just think last year they got a little ahead of themselves, and they did give up a little bit because they didn't have that person pushing them in the background. I think it's going to be different this year.
How hurt was Jalen Hurts? I mean, he looked like a completely different quarterback at the end of the year, and I know, listen, these guys are warriors, and they won't say much, but he definitely, the last 6 or 7 games, looked like a completely different guy, and how hurt was he?
The funny thing is, I will say this, and it's crazy when you say what you just said, because I agree. Listen, he did not have a great 6 to 7 games down the stretch, understandably so. He was dealing with multiple injuries when he came into the season last year, which makes me even crazy to think how good he was in the beginning, with the knee, with a couple other lingering injuries that weren't documented. But here's the thing, as bad as people say he was, he still finished the year with better numbers than he did the previous year. So if you think about it,
right.
Listen, his percentage from completion dropped 1%, but he also went up 138 attempts. That's bound to happen. He still threw for 3,900 yards. He still scored 15 touchdowns on the ground and threw for 23. Both those numbers up. So my point is, look, we can look and dive into this as much as we want, but it just shows that, okay, he wasn't the Jalen Hurts in the beginning of the year, but he still was good enough. The problem was it was the team. And now when you have a completely different offense, a completely different chemistry with the guy who has shown in Kellen Moore that he knows how an offense is supposed to be run, I think this offense not only is going to be the best in football, but it's going to be scary. It is going to be scary because nobody's even talking about how much that Saquon Barkley move is not only impact, but
that's huge.
Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, no question about it. Having a better running game with somebody like Saquon, especially if you can keep him healthy the whole year. I guess that's been the one thing that kind of has bugged him throughout his career, is that he doesn't play all 17 games. You have other talented running backs in the backfield. You don't have to use him 30, 35 times a game.
No, you don't. But here's what I will say for everybody that talks about the Philadelphia Eagles and their offensive philosophy when it comes to the running back position. When I open up this segment by saying listen to the coaches, listen to Howie Roseman. Howie Roseman, when he signed him, when people asked him, he said, look, this isn't a guy we expect to come here and touch the ball 220 times. He's going to touch the ball 300-plus times. So they 100%. And I'm going to give you a little secret here. This is Tony always has these little perceptions in his head of how things are going to work out. Keep an eye on what they do with Kenny Pickett. I'm just going to throw it out there because think about what has happened this year. You have your Hall of Fame center, the leader of the tush push, Jason Kelsey, that number one retires. He's not there anymore. You have a quarterback who you just said, you understand he was dealing with injuries, and I said the same thing. A lot of them that were undocumented. They're going to protect Jalen Hurts at all costs. You bring a guy named Saquon Barkley who's going to get more goal line work. But that tush push is still going to happen. But I tell you right now, Rich, Kenny Pickett is going to be the guy running it. That's why they brought him in here. They are going to protect Jalen Hurts at all costs, and you're going to see Pickett on the field a lot more than people expect. That's my prediction right there.
Tony Cutillo. Again, Tony has got his hands in many cookie jars. He's the founder of Heat Ratio Sports and Rise and React Media, the host of the Blue Coats Beat. He talked about that. That's the feeder for the 76ers, the host of Win Daily on Sirius XM, 9 to 11 on Sunday nights, and also a fantasy football analyst for Win Daily Sports. And we had him on several times last year, and we always asked him for a little nugget, and those little nuggets came through just about every time. And we'll have Tony on a lot more as the fantasy season comes along. Tony, all the best. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us, and continued success there in Philly.
Anytime, my man. I really appreciate it, and happy birthday to your wife, man. Congratulations, and hopefully you get to celebrate once you eventually get home.